Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
It is an honor to be here, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to come and stand before you this morning. I have done many things in my time as an ordained minister, but this is the first time I've been invited to preach at an Episcopal church. However, I want you to know that for a long time I've had a great appreciation for your liturgical traditions. In fact, I have known young people who, from my tradition, who have gone to the seminary, discovered the Episcopalians, and said things like, those people really know how to worship. Or, as one young man said to me, they speak English. I just hope that my syntax and grammar will be suitable for today. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Amen. When I read the Bible, I sometimes wonder about the tone of voice that is spoken. The written word tells us what people say, but it doesn't tell us how they say it. For instance, you might remember the story of Moses, who had that encounter with God there at the burning bush. There he was with his shoes off, talking to God. God had a job for Moses. He had a role. God said, Moses, I want you to go down to Egypt and knock on Pharaoh's door and say, let my people go. Now, it could have gone this way. Moses declined at first. He might have said, Lord, I am not the right person for this job. I am a poor public speaker. When I get in front of crowds, I get nervous and my words come out as stammering and stuttering. You're just going to have to find someone else. That might have been the way it went, or it might have been like this. Are you crazy? I'm not going down there. That man wanted to kill me. We don't know. Well, this is what happens to me when I read this story in the book of Acts, a story that really begins in chapter 6. It appears that in the early days of the church, there was a conflict. Imagine that. It appears that there were two groups in the early church. There was one group that they called the Hebrews, and there was another group that they called the Hellenists. And these people were all in the same church, but they did not always see eye to eye. They had a program in the church, a commitment to take care of the elderly widows. We are going to make sure the widows in our church have plenty of food. We're going to deliver food to them so they don't have to worry about buying food or preparing meals. We're going to take care of the widows. But it turned out that the Hellenist widows felt like they were getting short shrift. They observed that the Hebrew widows were getting the prime cuts. The Hellenist widows were getting leftovers, and so they complained. They took their complaint to the apostles, to the leaders of the church. Now here's where I don't know about the tone of voice, but it might have gone like this. The leaders of the church said, when they heard about all this commotion about the meals for the widows, they said, we leaders, we apostles are very busy. We are ministry of the word and prayer. We have committee meetings to go to. We have budgets to look over. We have an enormous amount of administrative tasks. We have no time to even think about this Meals on Wheels program. We're going to have to get somebody else to do that. It does sound to me like what they wanted to do was sit in their offices and shuffle papers and let somebody else go out and do the dirty work. But amazingly, everybody liked that idea. They thought, this is wonderful. Let's develop a new order of ministry, a ministry of service. We'll call it the diaconate, deacons. They appointed a search committee. The search committee came up with 7 names. The first one they named was a man named Stephen. They laid hands on those 7. They prayed over them and sent them out to do the ministry of the church. Stephen apparently was really, really good at what he did. Not only did he serve the widows of the congregation, but it says that he did amazing wonders and signs among the people. He even was free to express his faith, to talk about the things that he had experienced, the things he had seen and heard, his relationship with Jesus Christ. He talked about that among the Jewish people of the community, even argued with them, but it said nobody could out-argue Stephen. Of course, sometimes when you out-argue somebody, that makes them angry. And so sure enough, the Jewish authorities trumped up some charges against Stephen, dragged him in front of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, and said, this man is blaspheming Moses and God. They brought in all kinds of witnesses, talked bad things about Stephen. Finally, the high priest looked at him, and oh, by the way, it said he had a face like an angel, which I guess is one of the requirements to be a deacon. And he said, what do you have to say about this? Well, for Stephen, that was like somebody flung open the doors real wide, because he gave a sermon that occupies nearly every word of the 7th chapter of the book of Acts. It wasn't really a sermon so much as it was a Sunday school lesson. Stephen reviewed for them the message of their tradition. He talked about Abraham. He talked about Jacob. He talked about Joseph. He talked about Moses. After he said those things, he could have just stopped. I suspect if he would have stopped right there, he could have walked away. But Stephen didn't stop. He couldn't resist. And here's where I'm sure I know the tone of voice that he used. He said the following: "You stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in heart and ear, you are forever opposing the Holy Spirit, just as your ancestors did. Which of the prophets did not your ancestors persecute? They killed those who foretold the coming of the righteous one, and now you have become their betrayers and their murderers. You are the ones who received the law as ordained by angels, and yet you have not kept it." Well, that did. They were enraged. And even as Stephen gazed up and said, "Look, I see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of God," they laid hands on him and dragged him out of the city gates, picked up rocks, and stoned him to death. The story of the ministry of the deacons is, on one hand, something like a scathing remark against those of us who are ordained and prefer to do our ministries in our offices, those of us who feel like we're too busy and too important to do the hands-on work. But it's also an affirmation that everyone in the church, not just those who are called deacons, but everyone has a role, a commitment, an ongoing call to deny ourselves and serve the needs of others. In my time of ministry, I have known many, many people who have taken this call very seriously without much fanfare and involve themselves in that day-to-day ministry of service in things like food pantries, clothing closet, baby pantries, prison ministry, Habitat for Humanity. Those are the saints of the church. I've also known people who have struggled to find a way to fulfill that calling. I've heard a lot of people say, I just don't know what to do. I don't see anything that I can really do. Others say, I have no skills. I have no qualifications. And others have honestly said, this looks too dangerous. It might be risky. It might get me out of my comfort zone. I've heard others say, serving in the church, well, I tried that, but I went unrecognized. The people I served didn't even say thank you. And worse than that, somebody else took credit for something that I had already done. But the comment that I've heard the most from people who struggle to find their role in the church is, nobody ever asked me to do anything. Now, it's also important for members of the church to remember that we need to be in conversation with one another. We need to speak clearly, honestly with each other, especially when we have opposing points of view. It's vitally important. It's a part of our service. It's a part of our calling to be in good communication with one another. Several years ago, I wanted to be in a choir. I had gone to this choir concert. They were singing beautiful music. I was very impressed. They sang challenging music. I thought, I'd like to be in that choir. Unfortunately, it wasn't the kind of thing where you could just walk in and take your place. You had to try out. You had to be accepted. So with some fear and trembling, I made an appointment to audition for this choir. On the appointed day, I arrived at a large auditorium that was completely dark and empty, except for 3 people sitting up on the stage, one of whom was the choir director. Well, we introduced ourselves, and they asked me some questions about my experience in singing in choirs. And then they said, well, why don't you go ahead and sing something for us? Just sing anything you want. Yikes! Well, fortunately, I had anticipated this. I had prepared something. I even warmed up a little bit in the car before I arrived. So there in that dark and empty auditorium, I started to sing. While I was singing, I couldn't help but notice that the choir director was taking notes. So afterwards, he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, let's just see here. He said, good tone. Good tone. Good pitch. Okay, good pitch. Sloppy consonants. What? Oh yes, he said, you have sloppy consonants. No way. Yes, I'm sorry. He said, in this choir, the issue is never volume, it's always diction. I never worry about how loud the choir can sing. I worry that the audience can understand the words. Well, they let me in, but I had to be very careful about pronouncing my consonants clearly. Good advice for choral singers. Good advice for the church. Because anybody can yell and scream and try to get their way when the discussions in church life take place. Any old fool can use manipulative or coercive tactics to try to sway the opinion of a person or a group, one or the other. But it takes spiritual wisdom to speak with compassion and care. It takes spiritual wisdom to speak with precision and clarity. So, all of you who are deacons in St. Philip's Episcopal Church, perhaps the story of Stephen might be something like a role model for the many ways that we can serve our God in the ministry of the church. Amen. Amen. Shall we stand now for the 19th reading? We believe in one God,
the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us and for our salvation, he came down from heaven. By the power of the Holy Spirit, he became incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and was made man. For our sake he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried. On the third day he rose again, in accordance with the Scriptures. He ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son. With the Father and the Son he is worshipped and glorified. He has spoken through the prophets. We believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We acknowledge one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. We look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Amen.